Sarah Chin stood at 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed barely 110 pounds. Her small frame made her look like a child among the towering Marines surrounding her on the training ground. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Pendleton as she adjusted her oversized helmet that kept sliding down over her eyes. "Look what we got here," laughed Sergeant Rodriguez, a mountain of a man with arms thicker than Sarah's waist.
"Did someone bring their little sister to training today?"
The other recruits erupted in laughter, their voices echoing across the dusty field. Sarah kept her eyes forward, focusing on the obstacle course ahead. She had heard these jokes every single day for the past 3 weeks since arriving at boot camp. Her drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Williams, had made it clear from day one that he didn't think she belonged here.
"Chun, you think this is summer camp?" Williams barked, his face inches from hers. "This is the United States Marine Corps.
We don't have time to babysit little girls who think they can play soldier." The other recruits snickered behind her. Marcus Thompson, a former high school football player from Texas, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's gonna wash out by the end of the week. I give her 3 more days, max."
Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her rifle.
She had dreamed of becoming a Marine since she was 8 years old, watching her older brother David return from deployment in Afghanistan. He had looked so proud in his dress blues, so strong and confident. She wanted to serve her country just like he did. But David had died in a car accident 2 years ago, just months before she turned 18. The drunk driver who hit him walked away without a scratch while her brother, who had survived 2 combat tours, died instantly. That night, lying in her hospital bed after the funeral, Sarah made a promise to David's memory. She would carry on his legacy. She would become the Marine he always believed she could be. The obstacle course stretched before them like a nightmare of ropes, walls, and mud pits. Sarah watched as the male recruits effortlessly scaled the wooden barriers and swung across the rope bridges. When her turn came, she struggled to pull herself up the first wall. Her arms shook with effort as she finally made it over, only to land hard in the mud below.
"Pathetic!" Williams screamed.
"My grandmother could do better than that, and she's been dead for 10 years.
More laughter rippled through the group.
Sarah wiped the mud from her face and kept moving.
The next obstacle was a rope climb that seemed to stretch endlessly upward.
She had never been good at rope climbing, even in high school gym class. Her palms were sweaty and her grip kept slipping. Halfway up, her hands gave out and she fell into the safety net below with a loud thud.
"Weakling," shouted Private Johnson, a hulking man from Detroit who bench pressed twice his body weight. "You can't even do a simple rope climb. What are you gonna do when we're in combat and you can't keep up?"
The words hit Sarah harder than the fall. She scrambled out of the net, her face burning with embarrassment. Around her, the other recruits were completing the course with ease, their powerful bodies moving like machines built for warfare.
During hand-to-hand combat training, the mockery only got worse.
Sarah was paired with different partners throughout the day, and each one treated her like a practice dummy. They would go easy on her at first, almost playing around, before inevitably overpowering her with minimal effort. "Come on, Chen," laughed Private Martinez as he easily flipped her to the ground for the 5th time in a row.
"At least try to fight back. This isn't even practice anymore."
Sarah picked herself up, dirt and grass stains covering her uniform. Her body ached from being thrown around like a rag doll all morning. She could see the disappointment in her instructor's eyes and hear the whispered conversations among her fellow recruits. "She's holding back the whole platoon," someone muttered.
"Why did they even let her in? This isn't the place for charity cases. She's gonna get someone killed in the field."
That evening in the barracks, Sarah sat alone on her bunk while the others gathered in groups, sharing stories and building the bonds that would carry them through their military careers. She stared at the letter from her mother that had arrived that morning. "I'm so proud of you for following your dreams," her mother had written.
David would be proud too.
"Remember what he always used to say, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it under her pillow. She thought about David's words, remembering how he used to train with her in their backyard when she was younger.
He never went easy on her, but he also never made her feel weak or incapable. "You've got heart, little sister," he would tell her after she'd been knocked down for the 100th time. "That's worth more than muscle any day. Heart doesn't give up." But, lying in her narrow bunk, listening to the snores and conversations around her, Sarah wondered if heart was enough. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. The next morning brought more of the same. Physical training started before dawn with a 5-mile run. Sarah struggled to keep up with the pack, her shorter legs working twice as hard to match their pace. By mile 3, she was falling behind. By mile 4, she was alone except for the drill instructor jogging beside her, his face twisted in disgust. "You're slowing down the entire unit, Chen," Williams shouted as they ran. "Do you understand what that means in combat? When your squad is trying to reach cover and you can't keep up, you put everyone in danger." Sarah's lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but she kept pushing forward. Behind her, she could hear the rest of the platoon finishing their run and starting their next exercise. She was holding them back, just like everyone said. When she finally completed the run, nearly 15 minutes behind everyone else, the other recruits were already deep into strength training. Sarah joined them at the pull-up bars, where her struggles became even more apparent. While the men easily knocked out set after set of perfect pull-ups, Sarah could barely manage 3 before her arms gave out. "0. Williams shouted as she dropped from the bar. Chen did 0 acceptable pull-ups. The minimum standard for a female Marine is 3 pull-ups. Chen can't even meet the minimum. The shame burned in Sarah's chest like acid. She had trained for months before coming to boot camp, spending hours at her local gym trying to build strength. But nothing had prepared her for this level of intensity and humiliation. During weapons training, things got slightly better. Sarah had always been good with her hands and had an eye for detail. She cleaned her rifle faster than most and scored well on the written tests about weapon safety and maintenance. But, when it came to combat scenarios, her small size continued to work against her. "In a firefight, you need to be able to carry a wounded soldier to safety," explained Sergeant Davis during a rescue drill. "Each of you will practice carrying a partner 50 yards to the medical station." Sarah was paired with Johnson, who outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. When it was her turn to carry him, she managed to lift him onto her shoulders but collapsed after just a few steps. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she lay gasping in the dirt while Johnson stood over her, shaking his head. "This is insane," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She can't even carry me 10 feet. How is she supposed to save anyone in combat?" The other recruits nodded in agreement. Even some who had been neutral towards Sarah before began joining in the criticism. "She's a liability," whispered Private Adams to his bunkmate that night. "I wouldn't want her watching my back." Sarah overheard the conversation as she pretended to sleep. Each word cut deep, but what hurt most was knowing they were probably right. She had always been the smallest in any group, but she had compensated with determination and intelligence. Here, surrounded by physical specimens who had been athletes and fighters their whole lives, those qualities seemed worthless. The weeks blended together in a haze of exhaustion and failure. Sarah fell behind in almost every physical challenge. She was last in runs, weakest in strength tests, and struggled with every combat exercise. The mockery became routine, almost casual. "Hey Weakling, need help with that," became the standard greeting when she approached any physical task. "Don't worry, we'll carry you," the others would joke when preparing for group exercises. Williams seemed to take personal offense at her presence in his platoon. He singled her out constantly, making her repeat exercises that others had passed, forcing her to do extra laps when she couldn't keep up, and generally treating her like a burden that had been unfairly placed on his shoulders. "I've been training Marines for 15 years, he told her during one particularly brutal session. "And I've never seen someone so completely unsuited for military service. You're wasting everyone's time, including your own." But Sarah didn't quit. Every morning, she forced herself out of bed despite the pain and exhaustion. Every day, she endured the laughter and the criticism.
Every night, she fell asleep clutching David's dog tags, remembering his voice telling her that heart matters more than muscle. She began studying obsessively during her free time, memorizing every manual, every procedure, every piece of marine history and tradition. If she couldn't excel physically, maybe she could prove her worth through knowledge and dedication.
Her efforts didn't go unnoticed by everyone.
Sergeant Davis, one of the assistant instructors, occasionally gave her encouraging nods when she demonstrated perfect form on weapons handling or answered difficult questions during classroom sessions. But these small victories were overshadowed by her continued physical struggles.
During a particularly challenging week of combat training, Sarah's reputation reached a new low.
The exercise involved teams of 4 Marines working together to complete various tactical objectives. Sarah's team consisted of Rodriguez, Martinez, and Thompson, 3 of the strongest and most capable recruits in the platoon. The first objective required the team to carry heavy equipment across a river and up a steep hill. Sarah struggled with her assigned pack, which seemed to weigh almost as much as she did.
Her teammates quickly grew frustrated as she slowed their progress. "This is ridiculous," Rodriguez muttered as they waited for Sarah to catch up for the 5th time.
"We're gonna fail because of dead weight."
"Maybe she should just carry the first aid kit," suggested Martinez.
"Leave the real work to us." Thompson nodded in agreement.
"No offense, Chen, but you're holding us back. Why don't you just stay here and guard the base camp?"
Sarah felt tears threatening to spill, but she forced them back. "I can do this," she said quietly.
"Just give me a chance." "You've had 3 weeks of chances," Rodriguez replied. "Face it, you don't belong here."
The team completed their objectives, but barely within the time limit. Williams made sure everyone knew why they had struggled. Team Alpha failed to achieve an acceptable completion time due to one weak link, he announced to the entire platoon. In combat, weak links get people killed. That night, Sarah sat alone outside the barracks, looking up at the stars and thinking about David. She remembered how he used to tell her stories about the Marines he served with, how they looked out for each other no matter what. She wondered if he would be disappointed in her for struggling so much, or proud of her for not giving up.
"You still think you can make it?" Sarah turned to see Davis approaching in the darkness.
The sergeant sat down beside her on the wooden steps.
"I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "Everyone thinks I should quit."
Davis was quiet for a long moment.
"I've been watching you," he said finally. "You know more about Marine history than half the drill instructors here. Your weapons knowledge is exceptional. You never miss a detail in classroom instruction." Sarah looked at him with surprise. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her academic efforts.
"But," Davis continued, "this isn't college. Physical capability matters. Your fellow Marines need to know you can carry your weight in combat." "I'm trying," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I train harder than anyone. I push myself until I collapse every day. But I can't make myself bigger or stronger overnight." "Maybe not," Davis replied. "But there's more than one way to be strong. The question is, are you willing to find your own way?" His words stayed with Sarah long after he left. As she lay in her bunk that night, she thought about what he meant. Maybe she couldn't be strong like Rodriguez or fast like Thompson. But maybe there was a different kind of strength she hadn't discovered yet. The next phase of training would test that theory in ways none of them could imagine. The 4th week of boot camp brought a new challenge that would change everything. The platoon was introduced to advanced combat tactics, focusing on close-quarters combat and defensive strategies. Unlike the previous weeks of pure physical testing, this training required mental agility, quick thinking, and technical precision. Sarah noticed the difference immediately during their first tactical briefing. While her fellow recruits had excelled at raw physical challenges, many of them struggled when Sergeant Davis began explaining complex battle scenarios that required split-second decision-making and strategic thinking. "Combat isn't just about being the biggest or strongest," Davis explained to the assembled group. "It's about reading your enemy, anticipating their moves, and using your brain to outfight them. A smart fighter can defeat a strong fighter every time."
The first exercise involved hand-to-hand combat with a twist.
Instead of simple wrestling matches, each pair had to engage in tactical sparring where points were awarded for technique, strategy, and the ability to exploit an opponent's weaknesses rather than just overpowering them. Sarah was paired with Private Collins, a medium-built recruit from Oregon who had been moderately supportive of her efforts but generally followed the crowd in their treatment of her. As they faced off in the training circle, Sarah could see the assumption in his eyes that this would be an easy win.
But Sarah had been studying.
During her sleepless nights, she had been reading military manuals about combat techniques used by smaller fighters throughout history. She had learned about pressure points, leverage, and how to use an opponent's size against them. Collins came at her with typical brute force, trying to grab her and throw her down as everyone had done for weeks. But this time, Sarah was ready. She ducked under his reaching arms and struck quickly at a nerve cluster on his elbow, causing his arm to go temporarily numb. Before he could react, she swept his leg and used his forward momentum to send him tumbling to the ground.
The circle of watching recruits fell silent. Collins looked up in shock, not understanding what had happened.
Even Sarah was surprised at how smoothly the technique had worked.
"Interesting," Davis commented, making notes on his clipboard. "Collins, what went wrong there?" I don't know," Collins stammered, rubbing his elbow.
"She hit something and my arm went dead." Chen used proper tactical technique, Davis explained. She identified her opponent's attack pattern, found his weakness, and exploited it efficiently. That's exactly what we're looking for in advanced combat training. The other recruits exchanged glances.
This was the first time anyone had praised Sarah's performance in a physical exercise.
Rodriguez rolled his eyes, clearly thinking it was just beginner's luck.
During the next drill, Sarah was paired with Martinez.
This time, she applied a different technique she had studied, using an opponent's aggression against them.
Martinez rushed forward with typical overwhelming force, but Sarah sidestepped at the last second and guided his momentum into the training mat.
He ended up face-first in the dirt while she remained standing.
2 for 2, Davis noted approvingly.
"Chen, explain your strategy to the class." Sarah felt all eyes on her as she spoke. "Martinez attacks in straight lines with lots of power. If you can redirect that power instead of trying to stop it, his own strength works against him."
Thompson snorted from across the circle. "Lucky shots. Let me show you how it's really done."
When Thompson's turn came to face Sarah, the entire platoon gathered around to watch. Thompson was 6 feet 4 inches tall and had been the star of his high school wrestling team.
He was confident this would end the illusion that the smallest recruit could actually fight.
"I'm not gonna go easy on you like those other guys," Thompson warned as they circled each other.
"Time to show everyone what happens when you face real opposition."
Thompson charged forward with the force of a freight train.
Sarah waited until the last possible second, then dropped low and rolled between his legs. As he stumbled forward, confused by her disappearance, she struck upward at a pressure point behind his knee.
Thompson's leg buckled and he crashed to the ground hard enough to rattle the equipment hanging on the nearby walls. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Thompson, the recruit who had dominated every physical challenge so far, lay groaning on the mat while Sarah stood calmly beside him, barely breathing hard. "Holy shit," someone whispered from the crowd.
Williams stepped forward, his expression unreadable.
For weeks, he had been Sarah's harshest critic, the one who seemed most convinced she didn't belong in his corps. Now he was staring at her with something that might have been respect. "Chen," he said slowly.
"Where did you learn those techniques?"
"From studying, sir," Sarah replied. "Military combat manuals, historical fighting strategies, and tactical analysis guides."
"You've been reading combat manuals in your free time?"
"Yes, sir."
"Every night?"
Williams nodded thoughtfully. Around them, the other recruits were helping Thompson to his feet. He was shaking his head in disbelief, testing his leg to make sure it still worked properly. "She got lucky," Rodriguez muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Over the following days, the tactical training intensified. Sarah's performance continued to improve dramatically while several of the physically stronger recruits began to struggle.
Combat scenarios became more complex, requiring teams to work together using strategy rather than just muscle.
During one exercise, teams had to infiltrate a mock enemy compound and retrieve intelligence without being detected. Sarah's team included Johnson, Adams, and, surprisingly, Thompson, who had requested to work with her after their sparring match.
"I want to understand how you fight," he had told her. "Maybe I can learn something." The mock compound was defended by instructors playing the role of enemy soldiers. Most teams tried to approach with brute force, attempting to overwhelm the defenders through speed and aggression. Sarah suggested a different approach.
"The defenders are expecting us to come from the most obvious routes," she explained to her teammates as they studied the layout. "But, look at this ventilation system. If we can access it from the maintenance shed, we can move through the compound without being seen."
Johnson looked skeptical.
"That's a really small space.
Some of us might not fit."
"Then, we split up," Sarah replied. "I go through the vents and disable the security system from inside while you three create a distraction at the main entrance. When the alarm goes off, all the defenders will focus on you, giving me clear access to the intelligence room."
Thompson nodded slowly. "It could work. But, you'll be completely alone in there. If something goes wrong, we can't help you."
"I can handle it," Sarah said with quiet confidence. The plan worked perfectly. While Johnson, Adams, and Thompson created noise at the main entrance, drawing all the defending instructors to that location, Sarah slipped through the ventilation system like a ghost. She had studied the compound's layout extensively and knew exactly where to go. Moving through the narrow metal ducts, Sarah felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced since arriving at boot camp. Here, her small size was an advantage. The tight spaces that would have trapped larger Marines were easy for her to navigate. She reached the intelligence room and dropped silently from a ceiling vent. The mock documents were secured in a locked cabinet, but Sarah had also studied lockpicking techniques during her late-night research sessions. Within minutes, she had the intelligence and was making her way back through the vents.
When she emerged from the maintenance shed and signaled the all clear, her teammates looked at her with genuine admiration for the first time.
"That was incredible," Adams said, examining the documents she had retrieved.
"You were in and out without anyone even knowing you were there. How did you know about the ventilation system?" Johnson asked. "I memorized the building schematics," Sarah replied. "Most people just look at the obvious paths.
But there are always alternatives if you study hard enough." Williams was waiting for them at the debriefing station. He looked over the retrieved intelligence and checked his stopwatch. Team Charlie completed the objective in 12 minutes without triggering a single alarm, he announced to the assembled groups.
"That's the fastest clean completion we've seen in this exercise."
Other teams had either failed completely or succeeded only after extended firefights that would have alerted the entire enemy force to their presence.
Sarah's strategic approach had achieved the mission parameters more effectively than raw combat power. That evening, the atmosphere in the barracks was different.
The constant mockery had decreased, replaced by curious conversations about tactics and strategy. Several recruits approached Sarah to ask about the techniques she had used.
"Where do you find time to study all this stuff?" Collins asked, genuinely interested. "I don't sleep much," Sarah admitted. "But I figure if I can't outfight everyone, I need to outthink them."
Rodriguez, who had been one of her harshest critics, sat down nearby.
"I've been wondering about something," he said. "How did you know to hit that pressure point on Thompson's leg? That's not in any basic training manual." Sarah smiled slightly.
"It's in the Advanced Combat Medicine Manual. I read about nerve clusters and how temporary paralysis can be induced without permanent damage.
It's the same technique medics use to immobilize injured patients." "You've been reading medical manuals too?"
"Medical, tactical, historical, engineering, anything that might be useful."
"My brother always said that knowledge is the one weapon no one can take away from you."
Thompson joined the conversation, still rubbing his leg where Sarah had struck him.
"I've been thinking about our sparring match," he said. I outweigh you by almost 100 pounds and I've been wrestling since middle school. But, you dropped me in about 10 seconds. That doesn't happen by accident.
It happens when you understand leverage and anatomy better than your opponent, Sarah explained. Raw strength is powerful, but it's predictable. People who rely on strength alone tend to attack the same way every time.
Over the following week, a transformation began to take place within the platoon.
The recruits who had dismissed Sarah as deadweight began seeking her advice on tactical problems. During classroom sessions, she became the go-to person for complex questions about strategy and procedure. More importantly, her confidence began to grow. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, Sarah felt like she was contributing to the group rather than holding it back. Her teammates started including her in planning sessions and asking for her input on combat scenarios. The change was most noticeable during a large-scale field exercise that combined multiple skills. Teams had to navigate through hostile territory, avoid enemy patrols, secure multiple objectives, and extract safely within a limited time frame. Sarah found herself appointed as the tactical advisor for her squad, working alongside squad leader Rodriguez to plan their approach. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same person who had called her a weakling was now relying on her strategic expertise.
I think we should approach from the east, Rodriguez suggested, studying the terrain map. Sarah shook her head. Look at the patrol patterns. The eastern approach has overlapping coverage from 3 different sentry positions. But, here, she pointed to a seemingly more difficult route through rocky terrain. The sightlines are broken up by natural cover. It's harder to traverse, but much safer. That route will take twice as long, argued Martinez. Only if we stick to the designated paths, Sarah replied. But, if we scale this ridge line, we can cut the distance by 40% and stay completely hidden from the sentries. Thompson looked at the map carefully. She's right. The ridge route is invisible from all the sentry positions. But, it requires some serious climbing skills. I can handle the technical climbing, Sarah said. I'll go first and set anchor points for everyone else. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Okay, we'll try Chen's plan. But, if this goes wrong, it's on all of us. The mission was a complete success. Sarah's route allowed them to avoid detection completely, and her technical climbing skills proved invaluable when they reached the rocky terrain. She moved up the cliff face like a spider, finding handholds and footholds that others missed, then setting up rope systems that allowed her larger teammates to follow safely. When they reached their first objective, Sarah's small size again proved advantageous. The intelligence they needed was hidden in a space too narrow for the others to access, but she slipped inside easily and retrieved it without difficulty. At the extraction point, their squad was the first to arrive, having completed all objectives with time to spare. Williams was waiting with the other instructors, and his expression when he saw them was one of genuine surprise. Squad 3 reporting mission complete, sir, Rodriguez announced, unable to hide his satisfaction. Williams checked his watch. You're 23 minutes early. How did you avoid the Eastern Patrol that caught 2 other squads? Rodriguez glanced at Sarah before answering. We used an alternative approach suggested by Chen. The ridge route eliminated our exposure to enemy observation. Chen planned your infiltration route? Yes, sir. And she led the technical climbing portion of the approach. Williams looked at Sarah with an expression she had never seen from him before, something approaching respect. Outstanding work, Marine, he said, and Sarah felt her heart skip at hearing him call her Marine instead of just Chen for the first time. But, the real change came in how her fellow recruits treated her. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still whispered doubts and occasional comments about her physical limitations. But, for the first time since arriving at boot camp, Sarah felt like she was earning their respect rather than their pity or scorn. The tactical phase of training was revealing that there were different types of strength, and Sarah was beginning to understand what Sergeant Davis had meant about finding her own way to be strong. She wasn't the biggest or the fastest, but she was becoming something else entirely, the smartest, the most strategic, and the most prepared. As the weeks continued, Sarah's reputation began to shift from the weakling who doesn't belong to the brain who finds solutions.
It wasn't complete acceptance yet, but it was progress. And, for the first time since arriving at boot camp, Sarah began to believe that maybe David would be proud of what she was becoming. The real test, however, was still coming. The final phase of boot camp would challenge everything she had learned about herself and force her to prove once and for all whether she truly belonged among the few and the proud. The final month of boot camp brought the most challenging phase yet, advanced combat training that would test every skill they had learned. Sarah had gained respect for her tactical abilities, but she knew the ultimate test would come when everything was on the line during the culminating field exercise known as the Crucible. The Crucible was a 54-hour combat simulation that pushed recruits to their absolute limits. Teams would face continuous challenges with minimal food and sleep, requiring them to work together under extreme stress while completing complex military objectives. It was designed to break down individual weaknesses and forge the unbreakable bonds that would define their service as Marines. Sarah spent the weeks leading up to the Crucible preparing more intensively than ever before. Her physical conditioning had improved dramatically, though she was still the smallest in her platoon. More importantly, her confidence had grown as she continued to excel in tactical scenarios and strategic planning. During a particularly challenging urban combat exercise, Sarah's squad was tasked with clearing a building complex while civilians were supposedly trapped inside. The scenario required precision, speed, and flawless communication to avoid casualties. "We need to move fast," Rodriguez said as they studied the building layout. "The longer we take, the more danger the civilians are in." Sarah examined the blueprints carefully. "If we split into two teams and approach from different floors simultaneously, we can clear twice as much space in half the time. But we need to maintain constant communication to avoid friendly fire incidents." Thompson nodded. "I like it. Rodriguez and I take the ground floor, you and Martinez take the second floor?" "Actually," Sarah said, pointing to a specific part of the building, "I should take the third floor alone. These rooms are connected by maintenance corridors that are too small for anyone else. I can move through them and clear the entire floor from the inside out." Martinez looked concerned. "That's a lot of space to cover by yourself. What if you run into multiple enemy combatants?" Sarah had been anticipating this question. The third floor layout favors stealth over direct confrontation. "If I can move quietly through the maintenance areas, I can neutralize threats before they know I'm there. Plus, someone needs to secure the roof access to prevent enemy escape or reinforcement." The plan worked flawlessly. While Rodriguez and Thompson methodically cleared the ground floor and Martinez handled the second floor with backup support, Sarah moved through the third floor like a phantom. Her small size allowed her to navigate the narrow maintenance corridors that connected every room, giving her the element of surprise against each simulated enemy she encountered. When the exercise was complete, their squad had achieved a perfect score: all civilian targets rescued, all enemy combatants neutralized, and 0 friendly fire incidents. The instructors were impressed by the coordination and efficiency they had demonstrated. "This is the kind of tactical flexibility we expect from elite Marines," Sergeant Davis commented during the debriefing. Each team member played to their strengths while covering each other's weaknesses. But Sarah's growing reputation created new challenges. Some recruits who had initially dismissed her now seemed resentful of her success. Private Hayes, a recruit who had struggled with the tactical portions of training, made increasingly bitter comments about favoritism and special treatment. "It's easy to be the tactical genius when you don't have to do the heavy lifting," Hayes muttered after a particularly successful mission. "Some of us are carrying the real weight while she gets credit for pointing at maps." The tension came to a head during a combat endurance exercise designed to test mental toughness under physical stress. Recruits had to carry heavy packs over difficult terrain while solving tactical problems at various checkpoints. Sarah was struggling with her pack, which was proportionally much heavier for her smaller frame than for the others. Hayes noticed her difficulty and saw an opportunity to undermine her credibility. "Look at the tactical expert now," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Can't even carry basic equipment but thinks she can lead Marines in combat." Sarah gritted her teeth and kept walking, but Hayes wasn't finished. "How are you gonna call in artillery strikes when you can't even keep up with the rest of us?
How are you gonna coordinate evacuations when we have to carry your pack and ours? Other recruits began to look uncertain. The old doubts about Sarah's physical capabilities were resurfacing, threatening to undo all the respect she had earned. Thompson stepped in, taking some of the weight from Sarah's pack without being asked. Hayes, shut up and focus on your own performance. Chen's tactical planning has saved our asses more times than I can count. That's not gonna help when we're under fire and need someone who can actually fight, Hayes shot back. The argument was interrupted by the sharp whistle of Sergeant Williams, who had been observing from a distance. Hayes. Williams barked. You seem to have energy for complaining instead of concentrating on the exercise. Drop and give me 50 push-ups while everyone else continues the mission. As Hayes grudgingly complied, Williams fell into step beside Sarah. How are you holding up, Chen? I'm fine, sir, Sarah replied, though her breathing was labored from the heavy pack. Hayes has a point about physical capabilities, Williams said quietly. In combat, there won't always be time for clever tactics. Sometimes Marines need to rely on pure strength and endurance. Sarah nodded, understanding the underlying message. She had proven herself tactically, but questions about her physical limitations would always remain unless she could demonstrate competence in direct combat situations. The opportunity came sooner than expected. During a live-fire exercise with simulated enemies, Sarah's squad found themselves in a scenario where tactical planning wasn't enough. They were pinned down by superior numbers and running low on ammunition. We need to break out of this position, Rodriguez said over the radio. But there's no clever way out. We're going to have to fight our way through. Sarah looked at their situation objectively. They were trapped behind inadequate cover with enemies approaching from 3 directions. Traditional military thinking suggested calling for backup or attempting a tactical withdrawal, but both options would result in mission failure according to the exercise parameters. I have an idea, Sarah said into her radio. But it's risky and requires someone to draw enemy fire while the rest of you flank around. That someone being you? Thompson asked. I'm the fastest and smallest target. If I can create enough distraction, you can get into position to end this. Rodriguez hesitated. Chen, that's basically a suicide mission. You'll be completely exposed. Sarah was already moving before anyone could stop her. She sprinted from cover directly toward the largest concentration of enemy positions, drawing their fire as expected. But, instead of running in a straight line, she moved erratically, using every piece of available cover and keeping low to present the smallest possible target. Her plan worked exactly as intended. Every enemy combatant focused on the small figure darting between obstacles, allowing Rodriguez, Thompson, and Martinez to advance unseen from the flanks. Within minutes, they had neutralized all enemy positions. When the exercise ended, Sarah was lying prone behind a concrete barrier, breathing hard but uninjured. The instructors looked stunned. Chen, Sergeant Davis said as he approached her position, that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, sir, Sarah replied, getting to her feet. It was also highly effective, Williams added, reviewing his notes. You drew fire from 12 different positions simultaneously while maintaining mobility and avoiding injury. That's advanced combat tactics. Word of Sarah's bold action spree.